welcome. You've reached Phantom Phoneline Season 0, Episode 6, the show featuring carefully crafted, dramatized voicemail message-style stories of the strange, chilling, and perhaps supernatural encounters. So now, let's hear what's been left on the line.
Evening. Or morning. Not sure what time this'll get heard, but figured I'd give it a go anyhow. My nephew listens to your show, says folks call in when they've seen strange things. Paranormal, UFOs, ghost boats, all that. Said maybe it'd help me sleep if I said it out loud. So, here goes. I've worked the water most my life. Lobsters in the summer, cod and haddock when the permits say so. Our family's been doing it since my grandfather's grandfather. If you fish anywhere around these parts, you've likely heard of the place. Nasty ledge just under the tide line. Wrecked a Spanish trawler in the 60s. Current pulls weird there like it's got teeth, but I've known it all my life. This was last fall. Late September, cool breeze, flat seas, one of those eerie, calm nights where the water's black glass and the air feels too quiet, like the world's holding its breath. We'd stayed out late, me and my deckhand. Good haul that day, so we pushed past sundown. No moon, but plenty of stars. We were about 3 miles out from ledge, packing down the catch, when he says, "What the heck is that?" I look where he's pointing. Northwest, just above the horizon. And I'll tell you right now, I don't believe in little green men. I don't trust cable shows with shaky night vision, and I sure as heck don't spook easy. But this, it weren't like any aircraft I've seen. No red blinkers, no navigation strobes, just 3 lights in a perfect triangle, hovering low and slow. They weren't beams, more like orbs. Soft white, but they flickered sometimes like candle flames. We watched them maybe 2 minutes. Didn't move like a plane. Didn't move like a drone either. I've seen those. This thing was silent. Absolutely still at first, then it dipped real slow, just eased down toward the water like it was lowering itself on a string. Then, splash. Not a crash, mind you. A splash, gentle almost. And the lights just disappeared under the surface like pebbles sinking. Not a ripple after, not even the kind a seal makes when it dives. We were stunned. Heck, he dropped a coil of rope right on his foot and didn't even flinch. We kept looking at the spot, half expecting something to resurface, but nothing. Just dark water and those darn stars. Course, we had no phone signal out there. By the time we got back to dock, it was after midnight. Told the harbour guy about it. He said we were probably seeing flares or ball lightning. Flares don't move in formation, and I've never seen lightning look like that. And I've seen St. Elmo's fire once. This wasn't that. Still, I couldn't sleep that night. Couldn't stop thinking about it. Not scared exactly. Just off. Uneasy. Like I'd glimpsed something I wasn't meant to. My deckhand came by the next day and said his brother, works air traffic nearby, confirmed nothing was in our vicinity at that time. No planes, no choppers, no military tests. Weather was clean. A week passed. I thought maybe I'd dreamed it, or misread something with tired eyes. Then I saw the gulls. Out by Ledge Rock, a whole kettle of them, screaming and circling one spot. That ain't rare, but the way they were moving, tight loops, frantic, looked like they were avoiding something. Not fish, not a shark, not a carcass, just an empty patch of sea, churning with current like a drain had opened up beneath. I cut engine, let us drift a bit, and I swear I heard a hum, low, mechanical, like when you're near a power station or an old fridge about to kick on, just below the surface. He didn't hear it, but he said he felt pressure, like your ears popping on a plane. We left quick, didn't even drop the traps. We've been avoiding that spot since. Still fishing, still hauling, but not near the ledge. Now here's the kicker. 2 weeks ago, my deckhand's cousin, from other side of the bay, said his kids saw lights offshore from their cabin. Same triangle pattern. No sound. Dipped below the waves. Different night, but same direction. We didn't tell nobody else, so he couldn't have heard it from us. So yeah, maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe we saw some prototype drone or atmospheric nonsense. Maybe it's just tired eyes and old men telling stories. But something about how the water moved, how quiet it got, how the gulls acted, it weren't right. Nature knows. Birds know. Ocean knows. Anyhow, I don't expect to make believers out of anyone. I just needed to say it out loud, I think. Let it live somewhere outside my head. So thanks for listening. If you ever find yourself out there on the sea on a still night and the water goes too calm and you hear that hum, maybe turn back in, just in case. Evening. Again. Or whatever time it is you're listening. It's me, same fella who called in about the triangle lights out near Ledge Rock. Don't know if you aired that one or not. Don't much matter. I didn't expect anything back. Just felt better getting it out of my head. But, well, I'm calling again, 'cause I think maybe that weren't the end of it. This ain't easy, you know. Feels like I'm talking to no one and everyone all at once. But that last time I called in, it helped. Said my piece about what me and my deckhand saw. Those three white lights hovering in triangle formation, sinking into the water out by Ledge Rock. I thought maybe letting it out would bring some peace. But the sea don't let go that easy. This all started again not 2 weeks after I left that message. Weather turned warm for October, like summer was trying one last time to hold on. The kind of still, humid air that don't belong that late in the season. I remember thinking it was strange how quiet the harbour was. No wind, no gulls even. Just still. I was fixing a trap line at the dock when a fella from across the way came over. Guy works out on the draggers. Anyhow, he says, "You been fishing near the ledge lately?" I told him no, and he kind of gives me this look like he's weighing whether to say something. Finally he goes, "There's a spot out there. It hums." That's the word he used. Hums. Said he only noticed it when he cut the engine to take a leak. He was dead still in the water and heard this low buzz beneath the boat. Thought maybe he was losing it until one of his guys asked, unprompted, if generators could run underwater. That stopped me cold. I hadn't told anyone about that noise we heard. Thought maybe it was just our old motor vibrating weird or something. But he described it exactly. That soft, droning hum, like a fridge or transformer humming just under your feet. So I asked him, "Did you see any lights?" He didn't even blink. Said yeah. Night before, just above the horizon. Thought it was a chopper, but no sound, no movement. 3 white lights. Now, I know how stories grow legs in small towns. Fishermen ain't immune to yarn spinning, especially over a few cold ones. But this wasn't that. Ray looked spooked, real quiet, like he was still trying enough to figure out if he'd imagined the whole thing. A couple days later, I was hauling traps with my deckhand. Not near the ledge, mind you. We'd been steer clear since that night, but we were maybe 5 miles south of it, running a line we'd used for years without issue. It was about an hour before sunset. Water was glass again. I don't like it when it's that calm. Feels unnatural. Birds were gone. Even the usual radio chatter from the other boats had gone quiet. That's when it started again. Not the lights, the hum. Came up from below the hull just like before. Not loud, not angry, just present, like a note held in the back of your head. And the pressure started up again, like when you're going up a mountain or your ears are trying to adjust on a flight. I looked at my deckhand. He was already looking at me. Neither of us had said a word yet. Then we saw the gulls. A tight little group of them, maybe 20 birds, circling fast over one patch of sea not half a mile from us. And I mean tight, like someone had roped them into a funnel, They were screeching, changing height, scattering and regrouping like they couldn't figure out what was below them. We turned toward it, curious more than anything, thought maybe it was a bait ball or dolphin pushing fish to the surface. Happens sometimes. But there weren't nothing there, just flat water. No swirls, no bubbles, no sign of bait, just that same quiet hum, stronger now, like it knew we were looking. We sat there watching for a few minutes. Then, and I swear this is true, the water right beneath the birds started churning. Real gentle, like a slow-motion whirlpool, but spread out. No direction to it, just moving. And the hum stopped, just cut out, like a switch had been thrown. Gulls scattered, shot off toward the mainland like they'd had enough. We sat there a while longer, only few minutes really, but nothing else happened. Didn't say a word until we got back to shore. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I get a call from an old friend. Retired now, he used to run charters out of the same harbor. Lives up the bluff a bit. He's not one to gossip or talk nonsense. But he calls me up, says his motion light's been flicking on at odd hours, midnight, 1 a.m., always facing the water. He looks out the window, doesn't see nothing, just black waves. But he says his dog won't go near the dock at night now, just whines and hides behind the shed. Next day, I go visit him. We drink some instant coffee, swap old stories. I tell him casually about the lights we saw. Not the whole thing, just the triangle and the splash. He gets real quiet. Says he saw something similar back in the 80s, only it didn't go into the water. It came out. He thought it was a flare at first. Just one light, not three, but it floated up out of the waves slow. Then they just hovered right above the dock for a moment, then zipped off like a bat out of, well, you know where. He never told nobody, figured folks would think he'd been drinking. But now? Well, he asked me if I've noticed any fish acting strange, and I had. Bait's not moving the way it usually does. Lobsters are slow, lazy. This old man says he thinks the currents around ledge are changing. He showed me tide charts going. Back 20 years. Something's causing it all to shift, only by a bit at first, but steadying, drifting out to sink. So I decided not to go back near ledge, least not for some time. I haven't told the missus, don't want her worrying, but I've started writing this stuff down, times, dates, tides, moon phases. Call it foolish, but I feel like there's a pattern to it, like something's building towards something, or trying to tell us something. Anyway, thanks for listening again. I'm sure folks will say we're just telling fish tales or hearing things from too many hours on the water. And maybe they're right. Maybe it's some new Navy drone we ain't supposed to know about, or magnetic fields messing with instruments, or just plain old brains playing tricks. But the sea's been here longer than any of us, and I figure if something wants to stay hidden, there ain't a better place to do it than down in the deep. Just, if you're ever out near the ledge, and the birds are missing, and the water's too still, and you feel that hum in your bones, don't stick around to see what shows up next. Head back to shore, just to be safe.
Hey, yeah, hi. I hope this is the right number. I've been meaning to call for a while now. I guess I just wasn't sure what I'd even say until tonight, but I think I need to tell someone. I don't know if what happened was supernatural or not, but it's been eating at me for years, and something stirred it back up again recently. This goes back to when I was a kid. We used to stay with my grandparents every summer, out in this creaky old farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. Real classic place. Wide front porch with a screen door that slammed shut. Every bit the traditional farmhouse. They were good people, quiet, kept to themselves. They'd raised 5 kids in that house, and by the time we came along, me, my brother, and my cousins, It was just them, the crops, and a lot of silence. Now, upstairs, there was this door. It looked just like every other door in the hallway, maybe a little older, a little more worn, but it was always locked. Always. And I don't mean just shut. I mean padlocked from the outside, with this chunky old brass lock and a handwritten sign in faded ink that said, "Do not open." My brother and I, being dumb little kids, asked about it, of course. My grandpa would just say, "That part of the house ain't safe." Nothing more. My grandma never even acknowledged it. She'd change the subject every time it came up. She had this tightness around her mouth when we mentioned that door, like just saying the words tasted sour. Over the years, we stopped asking. It just became one of those things. Summer meant hot nights, fireflies, sleeping on old quilts, and the locked door. A part of the house that didn't belong to us. There were nights when something about that end of the upstairs hall felt lived in a way the rest of the house wasn't. Sometimes, late at night when the rest of the farm was breathing slow and even, I'd lie awake and hear a faint creak come down from above, soft, like the hesitant sigh of a chair before it settles. Not the steady creak of an old board or the groan of settling timber, but a gentle, irregular creaking. It was almost rhythmic, as if someone was shifting their weight from one leg to the other. The sound would start and stop without footsteps, and it always seemed to come from behind that locked door. Once, I woke up and listened so hard I could feel my own pulse. The house was so quiet you could hear the hens in the yard. The creaking came again, 3 slow pulls and a pause, then 2 small rasping noises, like a drag on the floor. I slipped out of bed and crept to the top of the stairs, heart stupidly loud, and pressed my ear to the banister. The sound stopped the instant I moved. When I tiptoed to the door and put my eye to the keyhole, there was nothing on the other side but the dark. I remember thinking maybe the wind was getting caught in the eaves, or a branch rubbing the window somehow. But other nights, the creaking sound was so distinct, so domestic, that it put the smell of dust and tea in my head. It was enough to make you believe, for a minute, something could be moving in that room, all while the rest of the house was asleep. Sometimes my grandma would walk past in the mornings and pause in the hall, cast a glance at the little padlock, and give a small shake of her head. She never said anything about the sounds, but her eyes would look a little sad when she did. The adults all kept the same distance from that door, like it was a bruise on the house they didn't want to touch. But then, one summer, I think I was maybe 11, 12 maybe, our grandparents left for a day to attend some funeral a few towns over, left us alone in the house with a cousin who was barely 16, practically one of us. No supervision, just a whole afternoon to goof off. And wouldn't you know it, that door became the center of attention. My brother dared me to try the key rack in the kitchen, just for fun, just to see. I should have said no. I really should have. But you know how it is. You're 12, you're stupid, you want to impress your brother. I grabbed the ring of old keys, most of them rusted and nameless, took them upstairs and started trying them, one by one, while my cousins watched from the hallway, hushed and giddy. And then, click. The lock gave way so easily I almost dropped it. The padlock just swung open, like it had been waiting. The hallway got real quiet. I turned the knob. And I wish I hadn't. The room wasn't empty. It should have been, right? Just dusty boxes, maybe old furniture. But no, this was something else. It looked like a nursery. Not modern, not even old in a charming way. Abandoned was the word. Like someone had tried to erase it from memory. Peeling wallpaper, a cracked crib, a sun-bleached doll slumped in the corner, and this smell, stale, like rotten mothballs. Like time itself had gone sour in there. But the weirdest thing? It was cold, ice cold. The rest of the house was a sauna in the summer heat, but that room? My breath fogged. My cousins dared each other to step inside, but nobody did. We just stood there. The room was wrong, not in a ghost jumped out kind of way. It was just off. Like walking in on a secret you were never meant to know. My brother, He finally whispered for me to look over at a corner of the room. That's when I saw it. A rocking chair, sitting in the far corner, the only thing in the room that somehow wasn't covered in dust. That's when he whispered, "We should close it. We shouldn't be in here." So I stepped forward just to shut the door, and I swear to you, that's when the rocking chair moved. Just once. A single creak. It wasn't a big movement, not the arm-flinging, haunted movie sort. It was the slow, measured backwards roll of a chair finishing a long push. The kind of creak your grandma's old rocker makes when someone is sitting for a good while and then stands up. The slat at the base sighed. For one heartbeat, the room smelled like lemon oil and baby powder, and then gone. Everyone ran, me included. I slammed that door shut, locked it, practically threw the key ring down the stairs. We didn't talk about it. Not that day, not ever. Later that night, my grandma came back. She paused in the hallway and looked straight at the door. Noticed the padlock had been turned differently, and she just knew. She didn't yell, didn't scold us. She just said, "Don't go in there again." And then, almost to herself, she muttered, "Not after what happened." I asked her what she meant. She didn't answer. That was the last summer we stayed there. Next year, they sold the place, moved into a smaller house in town, no locked doors, no rocking chairs, just a lot of silence. Years passed. My grandpa died. My grandma went into a care home. One day when I was visiting her, I worked up the nerve to ask her. I thought she might finally tell me what was in that room. What happened? She looked at me like I was still 12 and said, "Some doors stay locked for a reason." That's it. That's all she said. But here's the thing, and this is why I'm calling. Last week, my brother sent me a link. It was a real estate listing. The old house, it's for sale again. Looks like it's been flipped. New roof, fresh paint, nice photos. But in one of the photos, down that upstairs hallway, that door is open. Wide open. And inside, there's no nursery. Just a blank white room. Clean, normal. Except there's that same chair in the corner. Sitting exactly how I remembered it. Just waiting. So yeah, that's my story. I don't know what we saw or what we stirred up that day, but I can still feel the cold from that room if I think too hard about it. Some doors stay locked for a reason. Guess I just wanted someone else to know.
Hey, hope this is the right number. I was listening to your show the other night and I figured, well, maybe I should tell this. Just one of those things that sticks with you, even when you try to forget. But hearing other folks' stories made me think maybe someone out there has had this happen to them too. Or maybe they can explain it. I don't know, I just know it happened. This was a few years ago, early fall, the kind of season where the days are still warm enough to hike in a t-shirt, but the nights hit you with that first real bite of cold. That perfect time before the real cold sets in, but after the bugs calm down. I was on a solo camping trip, out in the wilderness, somewhere way off trail. Won't say exactly where, but it was deep. Far enough that I hadn't seen another person for 2 days. Just me, the trees, and that kind of silence that makes you realize how loud the world usually is. I'd set up camp by a small clearing near a ridge, close to a slow-moving stream. It was perfect. Flat ground, good cover, plenty of dry wood for a fire. I spent the evening cooking, listening to the distant sounds of the forest settling in for the night. The wind through the trees, the occasional hoot of an owl, rustling in the underbrush, normal things. Typical stuff. As the sun went down, the woods got darker than I remembered. I mean, I know how it gets out there, but this was different, like the darkness settled in heavier, thicker. Then, just after the sun dipped below the tree line, the first rock hit. Not big, maybe the size of a golf ball. It came from the trees behind me, bouncing off the ground and rolling a few feet before stopping. My first thought, a branch. Maybe something fell. I figured it had just tumbled loose from somewhere. I brushed it off. Then, maybe an hour later, another one came. This one was bigger. Not huge, but heavy enough that when it hit the dirt near my fire, I heard it land. I turned fast, shining my flashlight toward the trees. Nothing. Just thick trunks and darkness beyond the reach of my light. I told myself it had to be something natural. Maybe some animal kicked up a stone. A loose rock tumbling down from the ridge, a squirrel knocking something loose, heck, even a bird. But then came the third one. You ever have that feeling like you're being watched? Not just looked at, watched, studied, like something's weighing the space between you and it, figuring you out. It started to feel like that. This time, I saw it. Not what threw it, but the motion. A rock arcing out of the trees, coming from somewhere in the black beyond my campfire's glow. It landed close enough to my tent that I felt the dull thunk of it in the ground. This wasn't random. Someone was throwing them. I didn't breathe. I just stood there, my light cutting through the dark, shaking just a little, because now I knew. I wasn't alone. I stood up slow, my flashlight sweeping the trees, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Hello?" I called out. "Who's there?" Silence, just the wind through the trees. Then from somewhere out in the dark, deep in the woods, this low, rhythmic, huffing sound. Not quite a growl, not quite a breath. Almost frustrated. I didn't like that. I'd been camping long enough to know when an animal's just passing through, when a predator's watching you, and when something isn't acting the way it should. This wasn't normal. I thought maybe it was a moose or a bear at first. Maybe I'd wandered too close to its space. But rocks? That's not how they behave. Another rock came. Harder. Closer. I backed up toward the fire, keeping my light trained on the tree line. I had bear spray. A knife. Neither of which felt particularly useful at that moment. And that's when it hit me. Not the rock. Realization. Whatever this was, it hadn't come closer than the edge of the firelight. Not once. It could have rushed me. Could have stepped forward just a little more, and I'd have seen it. But it stayed back, because of the fire. That was my only comfort. So I did the only thing that made sense. I fed the flames. I grabbed every dry branch, every scrap of wood I had, and threw it in. The fire roared higher, crackling and spitting embers into the night. The rocks didn't stop, but they didn't get any closer, either. That huffing sound came again. Agitated. Annoyed. But it didn't cross the fire's glow. I stayed up all night, sitting with my back to my tent, watching the darkness. The rocks kept coming, not in a frenzy, but steady, like it was waiting. Testing, reminding me it was still there. At some point, maybe an hour before dawn, the throwing stopped. The forest was quiet again, not peaceful though. Too still. I didn't trust it. I kept the fire going as best I could, watching the tree line, waiting for the first hint of daylight. And when it finally came, I packed up fast. Every step toward the trailhead, I felt watched. Like if I stopped, if I looked back, I'd see something I didn't want to see. I made it back to my car by mid-morning. Tossed my gear in the back, locked the doors, and just sat there for a long time, breathing. Thinking. I still don't know what it was. A person messing with me? Maybe. But who's out there that deep in the woods, throwing rocks all night, never saying a word? And why stay hidden, throwing rocks? Why not say something? An animal? I don't know any that do that. And if it wasn't a person, something else. I'm not saying it was something like that. I'm just saying, whatever was out there that night, it wasn't just the trees. I don't go camping alone anymore. Make sure you don't either.
Thanks for taking this. I've been turning it over in my head and it feels daft just to keep it to myself, so here goes. Last summer, I was staying on a working farm for a few months. Part of that volunteer exchange thing, you know? A bit of mucking out, a bit of painting. I got a room and food, and I got to be somewhere I wouldn't normally afford. The farmhouse itself was one of those proper old places. Low whitewashed walls, little leaded windows, flagstones worn smooth in the kitchen where everyone walked, and a slate roof that muttered in wind. Out the back, there's a narrow lane that runs between hedges and fields, the sort of lane you half expect sheep to appear from at any minute. It's the kind of landscape that hangs on to the past. Folk there still tell stories of ring forts and ancient ways without even thinking. They're part of the place. One evening it absolutely tipped it down. Rain like sheets, the gutters were running thick, the yard was a patchwork of puddles. I'd been out feeding hens and mucking a pen and came in soaked through. My boots were drenched to the lining, leather heavy with water, so I left them just outside my room to dry on the landing like the other helpers did. It seemed sensible. Warm upstairs and the little stair runner would protect the floor. It was late, we all went to bed. Next morning I stood there in socks and a dressing gown and blinked at the empty space. One boot gone, the left one. I checked everywhere. Under beds, behind curtains, in the kitchen, even the woodshed where someone might have kicked them in jest. No trace. Nobody claimed anything, the others laughed it off. Maybe you sleepwalked. Maybe you planted it for a laugh. But there was no scuffing, no wet footprints leading away from the landing. Nothing. I made do with trainers for a while. It niggled at me, but life on the farm kept me busy and I tried not to think too much about a missing shoe. Then, one afternoon, a few weeks later, when the weather had calmed, I went for my usual walk down the lane. The storm had gone, the air smelled clean and green, and the hedges had that wet smell of hawthorn and wet grass. I spotted it from a distance. A flash of the boot's leather caught between the branches up in the hawthorn, about 5-6 feet off the ground, tucked in the crook like someone had deliberately placed it there. It was my boot. Lace tied same as always, mud smears in the same place. It was dry, bone dry, not a single drop. Everything else on the hedgerow was still damp. I had to climb a little bank to reach it, and yes, it was mine. I remember laughing at myself, because what else do you do? And then I saw the elderly lady from the neighbouring cottage coming along the lane. I showed her, and she gave this half smile, the sort of small look old folk have when something sits just on the edge of common sense. You left it out where the lane runs, she said, matter of fact. They don't like that. Best not to leave things on a path like this. She said it lightly, as if she were warning me about damp laundry, but there was an edge, old habit. Later, over a cup of tea, one of the lads who grew up there told me the lane is called around the place a fairy path. He laughed about it, a little nervous, and said people used to avoid it after dark. He spoke about raths, ring forts on either side of the fields, and said the lane cut between them. In the old days, you wouldn't block such a path or leave your things in it. They'll put it right, he said with a shrug, and that's when the word fairy came up. Now, I know what you're thinking. Kids, thieves, magpies. There are perfectly sensible, boring explanations. Maybe someone nicked one boot to sell or to cobble something together. Maybe a practical joker thought it funny to remove a single boot. Maybe a dog or a fox dragged it and then some bird dropped it. Maybe a neighbour found it and hung it there so I'd find it. Those are my first thoughts too, and I told myself that most nights, until a few other small things started to happen, there were little oddities. At first, they were easy to explain away. A spoon moved from the workbench to the sink when I swore I'd left it in the box. A small pile of pebbles by the back door that wasn't there the night before. The hens would go quiet sometimes at sunset, and the fields felt like they were holding their breath. Once I was sure I heard a faint thrum of music, like pipes down the lane, late, delicate and quickly gone, but that could have been a radio from a passing car. There were, I admit, nights I lay awake feeling as if someone was watching, and these are the moments when stories soak in. When you grow up with a little folklore in the background, even if you've never believed it fully, you learn certain rules. The hawthorn tree that sits at the end of our lane is called the fairy tree by locals. People used to, and some still do, avoid cutting it, because folk said the fair people lived there. You don't hang laundry on a fairy tree, you don't build on a fairy ring, and you don't leave the path blocked because you're stepping on someone else's track. There's also the old notion about shoes. They crop up again and again in the law. Single shoes left, single shoes found. Shoes as an offering, shoes as a trick. Shoes are intimate in that they touch the body and measure its walk. Stories say fairies like to steal small human things, ribbons, shoes, even children's laughter, sometimes in mischief and sometimes because they like them. So once I found my boot in the hawthorn, people's faces shifted a fraction when I told them. The elderly neighbour lady said, speaking low, that her granny used to hang coins in the hedgerow as offerings, to keep them cheerful, she said, and that if anyone saw a light on the lane after dusk, it was best to stay indoors. Everyone smiled and shrugged and then said old ways, as if that covered everything. Still, you can look for rational causes. The dry boot could have just been sheltered by the hawthorn's leaves. Those trees throw quite a canopy and water runs off the branches. Maybe someone picked it up from under the landing eaves, took it to warm and dry, and then rather than leave it on the doorstep again, propped it in the fork of the tree so it wouldn't get in the way. Kids in the village might have thought it a lark to sneak up and make a small mystery. Magpies and corvids have been known to play with laces and drag small things, though a full leather boot is a heavy thing even for them. Sleepwalking? I suppose I could have misremembered leaving it inside and then tossing it aside in the night. Human error is a powerful eraser, but there are parts of that day I can't tidy away as cleanly. 1, the boot was dry after weeks of wet weather and there were no scuffs or signs of being dragged. 2, people around there do treat that lane with unease. It changes the way they walk. 3, after the boot, I started noticing small, deliberate placements. A pebble balanced on a gatepost in the morning where there had been none the night before. A strand of bright ribbon woven into a hawthorn twig. A patch of grass flattened as if someone sat there for a while. Small things, tiny tokens. Not vandalism, not animal business, things placed. And here's something else. How people behave. The older neighbours, when they mention the fairy paths, don't mock the idea so much as remind you to be respectful of the land. They'll flick a touch of salt across a threshold for luck, or leave a crumb for birds and say, "Your grandfather used to do that." It's not quite fear, but a practiced caution. In the way they look at the hawthorn, you can see they're holding a story close, because stories are a sort of map for how to move through a place. So where does it leave me? I'm torn between that practical, neat world where a missing boot has a plausible thief or prankster explanation, and the older, looser world where small things can matter, where a shoe left on a path might be taken as an offering or moved as a lesson. I don't like the idea of being unnerved by superstition, but I do like the idea that somewhere along that lane something small and curious decided to be noticed. I suppose if you ask me now, months on and boots relaced, I'm inclined to say both are true in some way. It was probably something simple. Someone found the boot in the yard, carried it off to dry, and later thought to hide it up the tree as a joke. But I also think the lane has a mood, and the people who live there pay attention to it. It's easy to be rational, but that doesn't always make the hair lie down on your neck when you walk past a certain hawthorn at dusk. So I keep my shoes in at night now. I don't leave them out on the landing. And when I pass the hawthorn, I say a silly little good evening under my breath, habit more than prayer, and I walk on. Maybe that's the sensible thing to do. Or maybe it's how you keep the line between what's ours and what belongs to the land tidy. I'll let you decide. Thanks for listening. If anything else happens, I'll tell you. But honestly, losing one boot was enough for one summer.
Hello. I'm leaving this message because, well, something happened the other night, and maybe I just need to speak it aloud. To hear myself say it. Now,
Don't get me wrong, we're no strangers to blackouts here. The lights go out often enough that I hardly notice anymore. 1 minute the TV hums, the next it's gone. The fan stops dead, the fridge too. Outside, you can hear the whole street groan at once, doors opening, neighbors calling, is it just us, or the whole block? And me, I've grown used to it. I keep candles ready in a drawer, matches in the tin. It's habit, routine, nothing more. But this time was different. I struck a match, lit one of the long white candles, and set it on the table. Same as always. The air was still. Shutters pulled shut, door latched, no wind slipping through the cracks. Yet the flame, it wouldn't keep still. It bent, swayed side to side, like it had its own mind. At first I thought, maybe the wax is uneven, maybe the wick's too long. But it moved too, deliberately. Not the chaotic sputter of a weak flame, but a slow, steady rhythm. It reminded me of someone dancing. And straight away, my grandmother's voice came to me, clear as if she were set across the table. She used to say, when the flame dances without wind, it's not alone. Something unseen is moving with it. She told us this when we were children, to stop us staring at candles too long. But she said it with such weight in her voice, you could never quite laugh it off. See, where I come from, fire has always been more than just heat and light. The elders say it's a doorway, that spirits can lean close through it. My grandmother told us about the offeret, the gin of flame and shadow, who slip into the world wherever a wick burns without reason. She said that's why you never leave a candle lit while you sleep, the flame becomes a beacon, a call. And I'll admit, most of the time I thought it was just her way of keeping us cautious, making sure we didn't burn the house down. But that night, watching that candle twist and bow, I remembered her warnings like they'd been carved into my bones. Then it happened, the part that turned my stomach. The flame stretched tall, unnaturally thin, like a blade being pulled from a sheath. And as it bent sideways, the light threw a shadow against the wall. I swear to you, in that shadow, I saw a shape. It wasn't just a flicker of fire. For 2 breaths, maybe 3, it looked like a figure, long arms, a curling torso, a dancer's pose. The shadow swayed and spun, as though the flame itself were a body moving. My heart stopped. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes. But it was still there, this dark form writhing on the wall, twisting like a jinn performing for me alone. I nearly fell out of my chair, scrambling back like a fool. And then, just as quick, it was gone. The flame shrank back to normal, its sway no more than a tremor. The wall was blank again. Empty. But I couldn't shake what I'd seen. I sat there listening. The house was silent, heavy. No footsteps from neighbors, no radio playing outside, no dogs barking down the lane. Just the sound of my own breath. I wanted to laugh, to tell myself it was nothing, just my eyes playing tricks. And maybe that's all it was. After all, the rational mind has answers, doesn't it? A candle flame can move from heat currents you don't even notice. A crack in the wall, the rise of hot wax, uneven wick, science has its reasons. And shadows. Well, the human mind loves to shape them into familiar forms. A man alone in the dark, thinking of old stories, is bound to see something that isn't there. But still, my grand's words gnawed at me. She used to tell us that jinn are drawn to flame because it's their element. They live in it, move through it, and sometimes, if the veil is thin, they'll show themselves in the dance of the fire. When the wick bends without cause, she'd say, don't sit too long in its company. It's not your flame anymore. At the time, I thought she was just telling tales. Now, I'm not so sure. Because what I saw on that wall, what I felt in my chest, it wasn't just heat and shadow. It was presence. Like being watched from across the room. I couldn't bear it. I leaned forward, puffed the candle out so fast the smoke stung my eyes. And then I sat there in the dark, every hair on my body stiff, waiting for the power to return. I didn't dare strike another match. Didn't dare light another wick. When the lights finally buzzed back, humming through the bulbs, I almost wept with relief. The next morning, I went to the market and bought 2 torches and a battery lantern. From now on, when the power cuts, I'll use those. Safer. Simpler. Maybe I'm just being foolish, letting an old shadow spook me. Maybe it was nothing more than tired eyes and a restless imagination. But part of me keeps hearing my grand's warning echoing in the back of my head. When the flame dances with no wind, something else is dancing too. And I'll tell you plain, I'd rather not share my table with whatever that might be.
Hello. I wasn't sure I'd ever say it out loud, but my nephew listens to your show and said maybe I should call in. Maybe someone else has had something like this and can tell me I'm not entirely crazy. So, I live in a small village. Nothing fancy. Right on the edge of our fields there is an old banyan tree. Giant, low branches that spread like hands, aerial roots hanging down and knitting into trunks. It's the sort of tree everyone points out to visitors, the one the elders used to sit beneath and tell stories. It has a presence. It's been there longer than most houses. Because it's so old, folks in the village have all kinds of stories about it. There's a nice, practical one. Years back it shaded the whole lane and kept the road from washing away. And there's the other side, the old quiet side. The banyan is a place where spirits are said to settle at night. People don't tie their cattle under it after dusk. Children aren't told to play there after dark. Grandparents grumble if someone leaves wet clothes out on the branch by evening. It's not malicious, exactly. More like a rule of respect. The elders call it that place, and the younger ones joke about it when the elders aren't watching. I'll be honest. I'd always laughed at the stories a bit. I grew up hearing them and filed them under old ways, the same shelf as weather proverbs and which seed to plant when. A few months ago, late one evening after a market run, I was walking home along the lane. It had been a long day, the kind where your shoulders ache and your pockets are already lighter from the day's small expenses. The air was still, thick with that summer warmth. There had been no rain for 2 days, the dust sticky on the road. The moon wasn't really up yet, only a thin wash of starlight and the yellow of a distant street lamp. I usually keep to the path, but that night I was thinking about nothing in particular, lists in my head, and I cut close under the banyan, like I always do when I am in a hurry. Halfway past, something happened. It was small but sharp. A breath of cold running right down the back of my neck. Not a chill that comes from wind or open air. It was sudden and focused, like someone had exhaled against my skin. I stopped, and the hair rose on my arms. The lane was still. There wasn't a draft anywhere. The leaves above did not rustle. If you live near trees long enough, you learn the little sounds they make, how leaves whisper and how branches sigh when a cart goes by. This wasn't that. I turned slowly. The moonlight slanted between roots and low branches, and for a second the banyan looked as if it breathed. The hanging roots trembled and the smaller branches swayed, though the air was an unmoving sheet. The motion was not the wild thrash of a storm. It was an easy, deliberate swaying, like someone pacing within arm's reach. I looked for a person. No one. I looked for bats or birds. Fruit bats sometimes rest there. And in the dark they can brush a neck, yes. But there was nothing that I could see. The lane behind me was empty, the houses clustered and sleeping. I felt foolish and fast and stupid, and I kept walking. But when I reached home, my mother,
who always keeps an eye open for whatever small trouble life offers, met me at the doorway with her sari sleeves rolled up and a scolding ready before she even said my name. "You went under the banyan after sunset?" she asked, and there was that practical worry in her voice first. "You should not do that with the rains coming." Then she folded her hands, not in the playful way we do for guests but in the old way. For a second her face looked older than it had any right to. "The banyan does not forgive those who go under it at night," she said. "You know the old stories." I tried to laugh it off. "Ma, I only passed once. Might have been a bat or the leaves." I told her about the breath along my neck and how the branches moved though there was no wind. She went quiet then and said something softer. "The tree is old. It has time enough for many things. You must not make a habit of it." She lit the small oil lamp by the door and muttered a short thing, a name or a phrase, I'm not sure, and sprinkled a little rice and salt in the doorway as she does when she wants to mark the house with protection. She put a small offering of milk at the base of the pot where we keep the broom, and pressed the lamp into my hands and said, "Take this when you pass the lane again. Walk by the road, not beneath the branches." Her movements felt automatic and natural, and I felt embarrassed and a little sheepish for being scolded in this way. But I also remember the precise feel of that cold breath and the image of the tree swaying without a breeze. It lodged in me like a thorn. I didn't sleep much that night. I tried to be rational. "Fruit bat," I told myself. "Many banyans host flying foxes. They sweep low sometimes and can give the feel of a passing breath. Or thermal pockets. The ground cools faster in the shadow of so much leaf and root and can make the air feel sudden on your skin." Maybe a person had been moving within the branches and I hadn't seen them. Maybe I was tired and my nerves were raw. I worked to pile these mundane explanations into a small, calm heap and sit on them. But you know how it is. When something like that grabs you, your mind finds ways to hoard it. The next day I walked past the tree in daylight. From the sun the banyan was only a banyan. The thick trunks, the aerial roots like old ropes, little new leaves that shone like shiny coins. There were black marks where bats had dropped fruit and a small pile of leaf litter where the roots met the earth. I crouched down and looked for signs. Roosting birds, droppings, anything. There were clear signs of bat habitation, the white smear of guano, the chewed husks of figs, and I felt my chest unclench a bit. Fruit bats, plausible, rational even. It was just an animal. Still, and this is the part that smiles at logic and says, not so fast. After that first night other things happened. Not dramatic, nothing out of a film, but a set of small niggles that unsettled the rhythm. My neighbor's cow wouldn't graze near the banyan some nights even in the day. It would stop and look toward the tree and refuse to move on until someone led it away. A child down the lane began waking around 2 in the morning crying about a woman's voice singing outside the window. It was the same song his grandmother used to hum at funerals, and he'd never heard it before. Small offerings, a scrap of cloth, a coin, would appear at the tree's base in the morning. None of the adults in the village claimed to have left them. Once, I found a small circle of dried leaves arranged neat and even near the root, arranged in an odd shape the way one might set a tiny altar. When I asked about it at the tea stall, a few of the old men fell quiet. "They call them marks," one said eventually. "Signs of attention." So I did what we all do now. I tried both explanations. I went back in the daytime and sat with the tree while the sun worked the branches. I watched the bats roost, and I watched a breeze lift the lower leaves and make a liberation of shade on the road. I learned how the earth around the banyan stays cooler and how the humidity pools in the roots like a little pond. In the practical world, these things explain pockets of cold. They explain why animals avoid a place sometimes. Animals feel and learn patterns we might call superstition. A pile of leaves could have been someone else's idea of a prank. The small offerings could have been a child's play. The singing by the child's window could have been the neighbor's radio carrying oddly on still nights. I also listened to the elders. One of them told me the story of how, long ago, before the roads were smoothed and before electricity warmed the night, the banyan was a boundary. Some people would say the spirits used paths like ours when the moon was new. He told me, voice soft and used to telling things in a way that doesn't press for acceptance. They'd sit in branches where it was safer to watch. The banyan knows which way the living go and which way the living do not. If you walk beneath it after sunset without leaving a little something, you might find it follows you home. My mother was not subtle. She bathed the threshold every evening with turmeric and salt for a week. She said little prayers under her breath and made me go the long way around the lane if I left after dusk. Her worry was part superstition and part life skill. Better to keep your children safe than to test the old lines. I started, perhaps foolishly, to treat the tree with both eyes. I rigged a small lamp on a long pole and, with a friend, walked under the branches one evening to test the air. The lamp flickered weirdly in patches under the thick canopy. At one point the light seemed to bend and throw a long shadow like a man leaning from a branch. We both paused and laughed nervously and said it was the way light moves through leaves, pattern making from the cracks of air and shadow. We walked on. Nothing grabbed us. No dread came down the lane. The next morning, though, there were 3 small white flowers, not native to the field and not from any nearby bush, pressed near the base of the trunk where we had stood. My friend shrugged and only said, maybe someone put them there when they came home. After a while, normal life smoothed things over. The child stopped waking up. The offerings ceased. The cattle returned to grazing nearer the tree by day. The lane resumed its usual listless traffic of bicycles and goats and evening gossip. I told myself that the whole thing was a pattern, a set of coincidences threaded together by stories we tell ourselves. That was a comfortable thought. It made for less worry. And yet, every once in a while, when the night is very still and I'm walking home from a late job and the air is that exact kind of warm still it was that first night, my neck prickles and I feel a tiny coolness against my skin, like the brief brush of a leaf against a cheek. It is never as loud or as certain as that first time. It is rarely even a cold. Mostly it is a small, polite notice. Remember the tree. Remember what it represents. I won't tell you I know what happened. Whether a bat moved too close and startled me, or whether a pocket of cool air and my own tiredness made my spine think someone had breathed on it. I won't tell you that a spirit lives in the roots and scented that lane with memory for the elders. Both could be true, each in its own way. I did learn something practical, though. When people older than you say certain things about a place, there's usually a history there. Sometimes about safety, sometimes about respect, sometimes about both. The rituals, the lamp, the rice, the small offering, they might be superstition, or they might be good manners, or they might be a way of saying, we see you, old thing, rather than, we plunder without care. So if you ever find yourself passing an old banyan after dusk and you hear the air change, do me a favor and don't scoff. Walk around the trunk. Leave your shoes inside if you have the habit of drying them out late. Maybe say a small thing to whatever is under the branches, even if it's only, good evening. It won't hurt. Might save you an unnerving surprise. Or maybe it will do nothing at all. Maybe it was only a bat and a tired man and the world doing its ordinary, complicated business. All I know is that this experience has taught me to walk a little more politely by the trees.
That's it for this episode of Phantom Phone Line. This episode is part of Season 0, featuring crafted tales inspired by folklore, urban legends, classic ghost stories, and the paranormal. If you enjoyed tonight's tales, don't forget to subscribe to Phantom Phone Line and be sure to share this with a friend who loves the unusual and unexplained. We've reached the end of the line for now, but remember to stay tuned and keep listening for the next one here on Phantom Phoneline. If you have a story to share about something unexplainable, check our website at www.phantomphoneline.com for future submission instructions. Any views and opinions expressed are those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily reflect those of the show's producers, affiliates, or sponsors. This content is intended for entertainment only and is not a substitute for professional advice or services of any kind. Viewers and listeners should exercise caution, seek professional advice if needed, and are encouraged to draw their own conclusions. Viewer and listener discretion is advised. Some content may be disturbing, sensitive, or triggering to certain audiences. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations is purely coincidental. Some parts of this content may feature elements that were created, altered, enhanced, or modified using digital production tools, techniques, or other advanced production methods, including synthetic or automated processes. All content is the property of Phantom Phoneline and may not be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form without prior written consent.